Hey, Tina.
Hey, Leah. We have an exciting episode today.
We do. I had a little bit of excitement earlier, too.
Oh.
I had a tornado drill, my tornado warning that I thought was real.
See, so your adrenaline is up. You're ready. We're going to do this. You're pumped.
I'm so pumped. It's the joys of living in the Midwest.
I'm Dr. Tina Kaiser, and as Leah likes to say, I'm the sciencey one.
And I'm Dr. Leah Sherman, and I'm the Cancer Insider.
And we're two naturopathic doctors who practice integrative cancer care.
But we're not your doctors.
This is for education, entertainment, and informational purposes only.
Do not apply any of this information without first speaking to your doctor.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast by the hosts and their guests are solely their own.
Welcome to the Cancer Pod.
So, yes, this is an exciting day because we have Dr. Sarah Court with us. She is a doctor of physical therapy with a background in yoga and Pilates. And she has started a program called the Cancer Resiliency Program that she's very passionate about. And she also has created yoga and movement content for Headspace, the meditation app, and a pain science continuing ed course for Yoga U Online. So,
yes, that's one thing we keep saying on this show is movement is good.
Yes, and she's a huge advocate for strength training during treatment. And so we should just bring her on and just start talking to her. Hi, Sarah.
Welcome to the Cancer Pod. So, Sarah, tell us your own inspiration for the Cancer Resiliency Program and your background, I guess, and what inspired you?
So I was diagnosed with breast cancer in April of 2021 from a routine mammogram that I was actually tardy on getting. I did the typical thing where you're like, oh, it's annoying, and they just smash your boob in the machine, and like I had previously small breasts, and so I was always like, oh, it feels like they start at your waist and kind of scrub upwards to try to find enough boob, and then like from your shoulder, So I never really prioritized getting one, and that's, I could give myself a hard time about it, but it is what it is. Mm-hmm. So about 5 years later than I was supposed to get a mammogram, I got one, and it was diagnosed. There was a bit of question around, because mammograms, as you probably know, and the listeners probably know, are not deeply accurate, but they're very good for like, there's something here and we need to look a bit closer at what this might be. Mm-hmm. So after a series of further mammograms and ultrasounds and all kinds of stuff like that, I was diagnosed with ductal carcinoma, not the one that stays inside the duct, but it had actually spread. It was invasive. And that, I was actually just talking about this yesterday with a patient. That's when I learned one of my new least and most favorite phrases, which was when I was talking to the surgeon about options and different treatment options. We discussed the possibility of just doing sort of a lumpectomy, like kind of a larger sized lumpectomy. And I adored my entire treatment team. And one of the things I loved about this surgeon was that she was just very sort of like facts-based, like here's the words and here's the information and you're going to go have your emotional reaction somewhere else about it, right? And so she was like, well, we could do the lumpectomy, but that would leave you with some architectural deformity. And I was like, okay, that seems intense. And it was only on one side, but as I sort of thought about the different treatment options in your head, you're suddenly like, well, last week I thought I was fine, and this week I'm considering bilateral mastectomy. It's an intense transition. And I just sort of realized, like, A, I didn't particularly want architectural deformity, and B, I didn't want to be walking around wondering when the other one was going to go off, especially from the type in particular that I had. So I decided to do the bilateral mastectomy and reconstruction. And I mean, not to be extremely shallow for a moment, but I live in Los Angeles. We really know how to do plastic surgery here. It's sort of like, it's a city full of plastic surgery, like real pros. So I had an incredible reconstruction surgeon, plastic surgeon as well. And so that took place over the summer of 2021. And then following that, I had 4 rounds of chemotherapy. And fortunately, because of where I was, the type of cancer that I had, because I was doing the full mastectomy, I did not have to go through radiation, which I was grateful for. Somehow in my head, I sort of decided I don't know why, because it's not like I had ever had it before, but I had sort of decided like that was something that I really didn't want to do. I think because I'm a movement professional and my understanding of how radiation affects the tissues, in terms of, general, not scarring exactly, but tightening of the tissues and all that kind of thing. It was just something that in my head, I was like, if I can avoid it, I really want to avoid it. And so then I went through chemo, 4 rounds of chemo for over a 12-week period. And I will say, and this is maybe my personal, feeling about this, and other people may or may not agree, but I have had other surgeries before, and I would so much rather have a surgical intervention and go through the kind of rehab and all of that than to do something that messes with my GI system in any way, shape, or form. So for me, going through chemo was way worse than having both of my breasts removed, which maybe sounds totally wild to some people. And I don't know how you guys feel about that, if you've had that experience or felt that way. But, my feeling is like, I'd rather have surgery than have like the world's worst food poisoning.
I feel like with my surgery, because I had a unilateral mastectomy, and I kind of had that feeling about radiation too. Like instead of I was told about the, like the architectural distortion and all of that, because I was very small chested. And I don't know, it's just kind of all very, it's all very familiar. Like it's very, but the surgery part to me was the biggest mystery because I had patients that I saw through chemo and radiation. And then they went off to get their surgery, and then they came back however many weeks later. So to me, that was just the big unknown. And I think, definitely chemo was like, as we said offline, wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm going to pipe in here too. I mean, one thing that you both knew, because you're healthcare practitioners and you had the wherewithal to kind of have some idea of the landscape before you talk to the surgeon, is discussing your preferences with the surgeon, I think can have a lot of sway in what you end up doing. Like just being honest out of the gates, because of course, as a clinician, I've seen people who were philosophically opposed to radiation. Like I'm never doing radiation. They made this decision long before they were diagnosed with cancer. And then they get a lumpectomy. And I know that they did not have that conversation with their surgeon. And, radiation may or may not be appropriate for every patient, but the take-home point here is to always be upfront with the surgeon, because it may have some bearing on the surgical procedure that's most ideal for a patient. That's always my thought, is because I see people afterwards and they are, sometimes they're raising their own risk of recurrence by the choices that they made by not being forthright.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, and it's sort of, I had never considered like what if, sometimes you play out things in your head. I'd never played out what if I got breast cancer? What kind of treatment would I want? You're not like, I'm not doing this kind of worst case scenario, mind games with myself. So it suddenly became something where, to your point, Tina, about like, well, philosophically, what do I feel like I want to do? And I definitely was given the choice. I could do the unilateral lumpectomy. I could do a unilateral mastectomy, or I could do the bilateral. And it was sort of like, it was really, we discussed it and it was really left up to me. And again, for various reasons, personal reasons, and then also just sort of, cosmetic reasons, I was like, well, I would rather, even though it seems like and it probably, it is in some ways the much bigger deal surgery to have, I would rather do that than face the possibility, like I probably would have had to have radiation otherwise. Mm-hmm. And then they also did remove, sorry, I'm just laughing. I'm just laughing because, as you know, you end up having some of the most ridiculous conversations that you could never possibly imagine when you're going through things like this, and when you're faced with certain choices about, so after I had the mastectomy, I call them the lorem ipsums because they're the placeholders, right? So they put the placeholders in. They put the space holders in, or they're not called space holders. I think they're called
Expanders.
expanders. Thank you. I never remember what they're actually called because I'm like, oh, it's the lower ipsums. And then what they discovered during the surgery was that actually there was some cancer tissue in my left nipple, which they had not removed. So when the cosmetic surgeon did the actual reconstruction, she also went in and removed the tissue of the nipple. And then so then before that happened, when she explained to me what was going on and why they would have to remove it, she just sort of casually threw out there like, we can take off both of them. And I was like, what? And she was just so like sipping her coffee and like, yeah, we can take both your nipples off. And I was like, and her reasoning was a more cosmetic one. She was like, so you don't have like one headlight. And I was just, what is happening right now? And for whatever reason, one headlight didn't bother me. So I was kind of like, can I keep something? Like, are we just ripping everything off? Is that the vibe here? Is just take it all? So for whatever reason, again, this is probably more personal and emotional than anything else. I was like, I would like to keep a nipple if I can, just so I still have one. And I'm not especially concerned about, the single headlight, quote unquote, problem. So they did have to do that when she went in and did the reconstruction, but that was following. So then after I had the surgery, I am a physical therapist, and there is, when you have any kind of surgery, most of the time you need some sort of physical therapy to kind of rehab you. Like they also went in and removed some lymph nodes through my left armpit. And so, you have your sort of post-op protocol where you are not allowed to you have to have like little T-Rex arms for 3 weeks, right? Plus you have drains, which are just like these weird little babies that are hanging off of you. You have to like put them in your sweat. It's the most bizarre thing. But then when I was allowed to start moving more, I couldn't raise my left arm even to the height of my shoulder because of the going in through the armpit and doing the lymph node removal. So I did my own physical therapy on myself for the most part. I have coworkers at the clinic where I work, and a couple of them came and did some manual therapy to help me actually get some range of motion back. But I knew enough about how to work, what it should feel like, how much I should be pushing and everything like that. So I did all of that. And then I had chemo. And again, for me, that was far worse for a few reasons. As I mentioned, I really intensely dislike any gastrointestinal issues. And for everyone who's been through chemo, I always describe it as it's like the stomach flu and the actual flu and the worst food poisoning you've ever had on top of each other all at once. At least that was my experience. And I know different chemo drugs have different side effects for people and the frequency that they're taking. There's obviously a wide variety, but that was my experience. And at the time, my oncologist recommended that so I would have one infusion and then I would have 3 weeks before the next infusion. The first week was just the total trash tornado of just everything exploding inside my body in every different direction and possible way. And when you're like, could I eat a cracker? I don't know. I'm not sure, actually. It looks disgusting, that kind of thing. And then you get to a point where you're like, all right, maybe I could go outside. It's been 7 days. But it is interesting how over that 3-week period, you do start to feel better. You start to get your energy back. You're able to eat more. You're able to go on walks and all that kind of thing. And it's that horrible irony of like right about when you're starting to feel really good, they hit you with it again.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so the first round, I think as for most people, was definitely the worst because you're just trying to figure out like which of the side effect drugs help and which don't, and how much should you take, and what do you have to then take as another drug for the side effect of the side effect drugs and all that kind of thing. And I will say, I live in California. Marijuana is legal. I'm just going to do a little shout out for legal marijuana. Was 100% the most effective of anything I took for anything that was going on intestinally, whether I was like severely constipated and hadn't, had a bowel movement in 4 or 5 days, or if I was feeling really nauseous, all of that. It was, and it's also, I think it is people's individual biochemistry and all that kind of thing, but it was by far the most effective side effect management that I had. And luckily, I also had an oncologist who was like, yeah, go for it. And my other feeling was, and again, this is, I'm not promoting illegal activity, and hopefully eventually this will be legal in all the states. So, but anyway, that was always the most effective thing for me. But then after that first week of, and this was just my experience, after that first week of feeling pretty terrible, what my oncologist had recommended as far as exercise was cardiovascular exercise. And he really, really hammered that home. And I believe he had been part of a bunch of research that had been on cardiovascular exercise for women, specifically women with breast cancer going through, well, actually, I'm not sure if it's breast cancer specific, but women going through chemotherapy and, what helped with, how you felt, what they call quality of life, right? Your energy level, your mood, all that kind of thing. And, I was like, all right, but so that's what I did in the first round. But for me, to get real like heartbeat raising consistent exercise, it was August in Los Angeles, which is very hot, and I don't particularly like running. So I was like, well, I'm not gonna, and I didn't feel strong enough to like go for a run, So I was like, well, I'm not about to go on a run in 90-degree weather when I already hate running and I don't feel great. I can take long walks, but a long walk is not particularly raising my heart rate. And he was like, do you have access to a pool? And I was like, not really. So I definitely in that first round didn't feel as good as I then felt in subsequent rounds. And what I ended up doing was going into PubMed, which for our non-clinician, non-scientists, for listeners, it's where like all of the literature around exercise and everything, not just exercise, but all of the sort of clinical research is. And so I started doing a little bit of a deep dive into strength training and cancer, and a lot of it came up specifically for breast cancer during treatment or after treatment. And there was all of this newer research in the past 5 years that was finding that actually doing strength training, meaning, lifting an external load, whether it's a hand weight or a kettlebell or a resistance band or whatever, whatever is appropriate for the level of the person, really improved all of those same things, their quality of life, their energy, their mood. So I discussed it with my oncologist when I saw him before the next infusion. And he was like, yeah, go for it. You're a movement professional. It's what you do for a living. I trust that you understand how to sort of dose this for yourself. You're not going to go do something crazy. And it was really incredible, the difference from round one to the other rounds when I started to include some strength training. And I wasn't doing, I wasn't going to like CrossFit and banging a barbell around and, grunting. And, it was me at home with some hand weights and some stretchy bands. And I really felt I discovered a few things. I found that period of that first week it was still terrible, but the speed with which I felt better in the, day 8, day 9, day 10 really improved. And everything felt better. I slept better. My appetite came back quicker. I had more energy to, go take a hike with a friend. Like I just found that for me, it was way more effective at improving that in-between time and the quality of that in-between time than just trying to figure out, well, how do I get some sort of heart rate raising activity in? And again, this was my experience, and I don't know if you had something similar, but the following year, when I was going through treatment, it was a lot of like, just kind of put your head down and do the stuff, right? Go to the doctor's appointments, do the surgery, do the rehab, go through chemo. Like you'll think about this later. You'll process this emotionally later. Now is not the time. And not to say that I had a ton of like full on just temper tantrum freakouts. Like one time a bug flew into my hair and I lost it for like 3 days. So, but it was really in the year following where I kind of processed a lot of what I went through. And one of the things that I was, struck by and left with was how much I had to find out information about, how am I going to make myself feel better on my own? Like there wasn't a ton of information apart from, do some cardiovascular that I was getting. And B, like, I know how to rehab. I do it for other people. It's what I do all day long. How is someone who doesn't have my job or doesn't have a history of, a lot of exercising or a lot of working with weights in their life. How are they supposed to navigate this? So what I decided to do is make this course that I call the Cancer Resiliency Program. And it's a series of 6 videos. And it starts with extremely, extremely gentle yoga, like you don't even get up off the ground. And then from there, it progresses in intensity, and the videos get a bit longer until by the 6th video, you are lifting weights. Nothing complicated. It's, squats and things like that. It's not sudden, like massively huge choreographic routines, but I made it as I wanted to create something for people out there who are either going through treatment or maybe recently finished treatment and didn't feel like they had the tools to get themselves back into exercising and didn't really know how to do it. So that's what I made, and it lives on my website now.
Well, one, it's an amazing story and I've, of course, looked at some of those videos and they're really easy to follow. And I agree. The first one is super gentle. So I think anyone can start with the first video. Are they made to be done during treatment, after treatment, or both?
Both.
Okay.
And obviously everyone's experience is slightly different. And obviously, please get clearance from your team before you start doing anything, make sure it's appropriate for you. And they do sort of assume, I kind of made it more for, in my opinion, like going through chemo, but, because there are some movements that you might be restricted from if you're post-surgery, depending on where depending on where you are sort of in your post-surgery and what tissues were affected. But, it's made to be done either way. Or if you really just weren't able to get to any of this stuff, to me, it's a way to gently bring yourself back into getting back up to speed and getting to exercise.
One of my big challenges with patients, because we did start an exercise, we call it exercise readiness program at the Cancer Center, that I worked with Heart and Vascular. They have a whole program in that department. And it is so hard for me to get patients to realize to exercise now. So many people are like, I'll do it when I'm done. I'll do it when I'm done. And I'm like, you got to do it now. And I don't share what I went through with a lot of the patients. It was easier when I was in Arizona practicing because they saw me go through treatment. And so I could share personal experiences. But I had an experience when I was going through chemo where I got down on the sidewalk to play with some puppies that were for adoption, and I couldn't get back up. And I had been doing squats and I was working my full schedule. And so I thought, no, I'm active, and I have patients saying this, like, I'm active at work, I'm still working. But like what would you say to someone to kind of convince them that treatment is the time to start?
Yeah. I mean, I use my own story as an example, and because I can really clearly track how different I felt when I started to include more exercise, and specifically more kind of strength exercise. So I've used that in the past. The other thing is I very purposely didn't start this series of exercises with any external weights at all. You don't even pick up an external weight like a barbell not a barbell, a dumbbell, I think until like the 4th or 5th video. So, it's a little easier of a sell or a way to convince people to be like, listen, just try the first one. You don't, I really emphasize, you don't get up off the floor, you lie down. I know for myself, I used to go take Pilates reformer classes, and I would convince myself to do it at the end of the day when I was tired, because I would be like, you lie down the whole time, it's fine, you're just going to be lying down. So something about telling people that they get to lie down is very enticing, I think, for a lot of people. But yeah, this idea that, like, because people do, you are tired, you don't feel good. And unless I have lots of personal experience that I can draw on where I can say, okay, remember when you felt this amount of not good, and then you went for a walk and you felt better.
Mm-hmm.
I have tons and tons of examples of that for myself. So it's not as hard to convince myself to do it. With that said, there's still plenty of days when I'm like, that's nice, I'm not going to do it. But starting with something very easy, starting with something that is really just about kind of reconnecting with your body.
Mm-hmm.
Because my experience was also, I spent a lot of time very aware of my own physical body and everyone else's bodies. And it's such an invasion, and it's such a strange experience where it's sort of like, your body is for a period of time turned over to these other people, and they get to decide what's happening. They get to take parts of it off, and they get to poison you, essentially. I mean, I know it sounds dramatic, but it's on an emotional level, that's kind of what you're going through, right? And I definitely felt like my body was not my own for a while, that like all these other people, because I felt fine. This is the thing that was for me so crazy. I didn't have any symptoms of anything. So I went from feeling totally fine to suddenly going through a year, 9 months of surgery and chemo.
Mm-hmm.
For no reason that I could ascertain, apart from some imaging and what some professionals told me. Right. So from a psychological level, from an emotional level, it's very jarring. And the beginning of these videos, the beginning series, that kind of quiet, restorative, gentle yoga, focusing on breathing, focusing on just sort of feeling, it's actually it's a great way to start to reclaim a little bit of ownership of your body, and feel like not so much like everything is kind of out of control and happening to you, right? But that you get to be, get a little bit more of the control back. And so I think from a psychological level as well, to do that during treatment, especially during something like chemo, where you're going through this roller coaster. I mean, I remember, God, like round 3 and round 4, I was like, I cannot believe I am willingly doing this to myself again. Having each time you go through it, I'm like, I cannot. And I know people who did like 10 rounds of chemo. I'm like, I have no idea how you did that, because I did 4, and I was like, that is heinous, So to get a little bit more of that feeling of having some autonomy of your own body, and doing that through some just very gentle yoga. The second video is still pretty gentle, but you kind of come up to standing and do a few things, or use a chair, And the other thing that I did for the first 2 videos was there's a fully seated version of everything. So even if you were like, oh, this second one seems a bit hard, you can do the whole thing sitting in a chair, and that's, so I created like a little inset in the video. So there's some person, well, it's not a person, it's me in the corner doing the whole thing seated in a chair, right?
Oh, nice.
So lots and lots of options. And I think sometimes people sort of have a love-hate relationship with exercise, and especially if it's not something that they were doing independently before they got their diagnosis. It can always feel like, oh yeah, I go to the doctor and he tells me to exercise more, but like, I don't want to, and it's a chore. Like, it's kind of placed in people's heads as this negative experience. So if that's sort of part of the battle, then I think highlighting that, getting some movement back in, whatever kind of movement, is going to let you psychologically feel like you're less kind of at the mercy of a bunch of things that are happening to you that you have no control over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I want to talk about a couple of things during treatment. I mean, there's a lot going on, not least of which is anemia. And so it makes sense that strength training or working on some resistive exercise, which is more about toning the muscle and your deep breathing with yoga and bringing in oxygenation, makes more sense to me just intuitively than cardiovascular workout when your red blood cells and your hemoglobin is kind of low. That would be very stressful on the heart to ask it to do more with less red blood cells circulating. So it's even intuitively, no matter what the research says, I'm thinking, well, yoga, movement, breath, some resistance and strength training just logically makes more sense than going out there and getting the heart rate way up when you don't have enough capacity to go up a flight of stairs without, huffing. So it's interesting in the grand scheme that we're still flushing this out and that there's no kind of standard of care, like if this, then that. I mean, I feel like we're at a point with exercise data that nobody should be going through treatment without a very clear standard, like this is what you should be doing during this time, given your labs and your treatment plan. I mean, we're not there.
Or having someone to refer to, because that's, like patients are told, oh, you should exercise.
Right.
And then that's it.
Right.
And I used to have patients come to me and I would say, "Oh, you should do yoga." And they're like, "Well, what kind of yoga?" And I'm like, "I don't know, just go to different classes until you vibe with something." And that sort of led me to go on and get certified, do the yoga teacher training, and then doing, like even further training within yoga for cancer. So yeah, just to be told, go out and exercise instead of being like, "Oh, I'm going to write this referral to this program and you're going to, have someone guide you based on your exercise ability." It's not a
Yeah.
cookie cutter type thing. So,
And, on that note, I have a question. We have all of our watches and heart rate monitors and all of these things that we can now hook ourselves up to and watch in real time. Do you ever use those kind of tools? Do you have any kind of even parameters that you say, I don't know. I don't know the answer to this. I'm not an exercise physiologist or a PT or anything, but it seems logical to me that there might be get it to this point of your maximum, but not above a certain amount, whatever the math turns out to be. Is there a way that people can self-monitor so that they don't harm themselves?
Absolutely. And I wanted to just briefly go back to what you were talking about previously, as far as we know enough from the research to be we should be able to kind of prescribe a little more accurately. My understanding of the general direction of research around exercise is that it is really, really heavy on the cardiovascular front because of the concerns around heart disease as, one of the highest mortality incidences in the US. But there is more and more strength training coming out, and there is more and more research around how strength training can actually improve cardiovascular capacity and things like that. And yes, exactly. To me, it makes way more sense to be doing something that is building muscle, like working with resistance, than going on a walk where I'm just eating up all of the available oh my God, how do I explain it? So you know what I'm trying to say, the energy sources that's living in my body, without actually building more muscle to have on my body, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it made a lot more intuitive sense to me to do that as well. As far as how people can sort of self-monitor, I have sort of a love-hate relationship with the trackers,
Mm-hmm.
because I find that it's very easy to get so obsessed with what the number is that I should hit, that I, end up doing things like pacing around my house at 12 o'clock at night so that I hit the right number of steps before tomorrow, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
dancing while brushing your teeth.
Right, exactly. I mean, I know people that just wave their arms around to make the thing, complete the circle or whatever. So, I think I think they have good, and depending on the personality of the person using it, it might fall over into this sort of obsessive category. But there's actually there's a completely low tech free version of how to know how much to do of what, and it's something called rate of perceived exertion, which I don't know if either of you are familiar with. So the same way that we have a pain scale, and the pain scale goes from 0 to 10, which I also have a bit of about the pain scale, but that's a separate story. We can create a scale that they call the rate of perceived exertion. So it's a subjective scale. It's you personally, and it's from 1 to 10. And 1 is I'm not exerting myself at all. And 10 is I am max capacity. I am picking up this incredibly heavy thing. I could definitely not do it more than one time. And in order to be working in the parameters of what builds strength, and there's a lot more to this, but a very easy way that kind of anybody can use is you want to be working somewhere around that 7 out of 10, 6, 7, maybe 8 out of 10. So what that might look like is, let's say you're doing a squat and you're holding on to a 10-pound weight of some kind, whether it's a kettlebell or a dumbbell. And you're like, okay, I'm going to do 10 squats. And as you squat 1, squat 2, pretty good, no problem. Number 5, starting to feel it. Number 6, number 7, really starting to feel it. What it works out to is you can complete the 10, but you definitely felt like the last few were work, right? If you could complete 10 and you're like, I could do 10 more of these, then the weight that you're using is not heavy enough. Mm-hmm. If you are doing it on your own and you're not getting help from a professional, you need to do a little bit of experimenting, right? Where maybe you try a weight, and people generally start with something that's a bit lighter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you do it with your 10 pounds and you're like, wow, that was really easy. I barely even started feeling it. Okay, well, that's too light. Okay, let me try 15 pounds. Oh, wow. Okay, 15 pounds. I felt like once when I got to 10 repetitions, I definitely could have kept going, but not by a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe try 20 pounds. And you're like, 20 pounds. Okay, that number 8, number 9, number 10, that was some work. Okay, so that means this is the right level for me. And then you can just apply that to whatever the exercise is that you're doing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot more parameters that you can track. You can track heart rate. You can, if you're into all of that stuff and you have your Fitbit or your whatever, I just found out there's this one called Whoop that I just found out about that's really interesting that tracks like heart rate variability, which is the ability of your heart rate to like then return to baseline after exercise. It's for the like super nerds. So if I'm going to get it.
Tina.
Well, there's a whole Facebook group. It's a heart rate variability group. And yes, boy, can you geek out on a whole lot of parameters if you really want to. Yeah.
But yeah, for the average person, rate of perceived exertion, right? Keeping it around that. So what that then means is, let's say you're doing your 10 reps, somewhere around that 7 or 8 is when you start to be like, wow, I could do a couple more, but probably not more than, 2 or 3 more. So that means you're working at that like 7 or 8 out of 10 effort level.
Okay.
And that's just, it's not the like absolutely most precise, but it's the easiest way for, general population, just regular person wants to do some strength training, but doesn't really have a sense of what that looks like. That's a really easy way to track it.
Well, that's helpful because I know that you have to get to that point to build some muscle. I mean, that's why it's called resistive exercise, right? You're using some kind of, if it's your body weight or a weight, and you're getting to the point where the last reps are a little difficult. That's where you're starting to build it. At the same time, it's a balancing act during treatment because you're also likely tired. Your, HPA axis, your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis might be a little wonky from all sorts of reasons, steroids mostly, and maybe lack of sleep, who knows? Like there's a lot going on during treatment that it seems like you should always have someone nearby, work with a professional if you possibly can, but at least don't do it alone. I think during treatment time, I think it would be also another piece of advice that we got to keep in mind because, of course, anemia can be severe and people don't always know their numbers. I mean, as healthcare practitioners, we generally like, okay, what's my hemoglobin? But not everyone tracks all the data as they go through. And I've had people take a hot shower, for example, and just a hot shower is enough to make them very faint because they don't have enough red blood cells to perfuse all their tissue at once. So they have to sit down to keep the blood flowing to their head. So I'm putting those cautionaries out there because you're a professional, so you can self-monitor, but I want to make sure that folks don't, go doing this by themselves and go too far.
Absolutely. And that's why as well, like, and I say this all over the website for my program, if you yourself, I mean, I was the same as like, as soon as all my labs came out, I was like, ooh, where's my, this level and what's my, but if you're not as sort of obsessive about that, then, definitely speak with your oncology team, make sure that based on your labs for the moment that, what kind of movement is going to be appropriate. And again, that's why I sort of started the video series with really, really gentle interventions because, to your point, movement is good.
Mm-hmm.
I really, the only times I've ever done some sort of exercise and not felt better afterwards were times when I way overloaded myself, either on purpose or accidentally, or, from riding the motorcycle. Sometimes that gets really tiring and you're like, oh, I feel like really rough after that. But yeah, that's why you would want to just make sure your team is okay with you doing whatever kind of exercise or amount of exercise is appropriate for you.
Oh, before I forget to say this to our listeners, there's no cost for your program.
Yeah, it's free.
It's free.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like maybe we should have led with that.
Oh yeah, because I didn't realize it was free. I'm sitting here thinking, Tina, like you like good for you. You paid for like the program. Oh, then I'm signing up. I am totally signing up for the program. I need some guidance.
Yeah, my feeling was, well, and I'm going to put a little caveat on the free.
Mm-hmm.
Donations are accepted. I'm going to put it that way. Because my feeling was when I was putting it together, I've created a lot of online content, and so I have a sense of like, well, what's the amount that people generally would pay for something like this? And then I just started thinking about how expensive it is to have cancer. Even if you have good insurance, which I have decent insurance, and I still spent over a year following treatment paying for having had cancer. And I know that I am in a relatively fortunate position. I was able to do a little bit of work, but I also had good, disability benefits, things like that, and not everybody is as fortunate or is going through treatment for much longer periods than I was going through treatment.
Right.
And so my feeling was like, and I sort of, I say this on the page as well, if you are going through treatment right now, this is free. I do not want you to pay for this. This is, I'm a, chronic do-gooder. And so this is my offering to all of the people having to go through what I went through, and wanting to give them an opportunity to feel as good as they possibly can in that circumstance. And then I sort of suggest a few donation options if you are done with treatment and at no point does anyone have to, the videos are just there, you just access them. But if you're done with treatment, if you're not still financially in a tough position, I sort of have a suggested donation. And the other thing that I put on there is, I found a lot of people when I was diagnosed saying things like, let me know what I can do to help. And which is both a great thing and also kind of a difficult thing, because
it's a vague thing.
It's a very vague thing. And the thing is, you have no idea what anyone could do to help, because you have no idea what's happening to you right now. Like, it's just this kind of chaos whirlwind, right? And so people but I understand the urge. People they recognize that you're going through something tough. They want to be available to you. And I did a whole post about it at the time where I was like, instead of saying, let me know what I can do to help, make a specific offering. Like, I'm going to come walk the dogs for you. Something like that, just think about things that would be helpful. I'm going to set up a meal train or, things like that, rather than leaving it up to the person who's now also having to make decisions about like whether or not they're keeping both of their breasts, right? They have no idea what else would be helpful. So this is something that I suggest for people. Like, if you know someone who's just going through treatment and you want to do something helpful, you can make a donation and give it to them as a gift, right? So yes, but it remains free, and it's been very exciting because I've been promoting it through my own social media channels, but and had quite a lot of response with people like all over the world, and people sharing it with their communities across the country, and it's very satisfying in that sense, because my biggest goal for it's not, I'm not here being like, oh, here's my passive income money making machine and I'm going to retire to Costa Rica, not at all. But my goal for it is just for as many people who need it to be able to access it. That's really it.
Yeah, that comes through on your website.
I was going to say, I love that it's extended to people who are in survivorship, or, even, I know that you're currently taking tamoxifen.
Yes.
So yeah, the benefits of exercise, once someone is through treatment, but maybe they're on a maintenance medication or something. I mean, there's just so much additional benefit in terms of, you ask almost anyone who is experiencing joint pains from endocrine therapy, what makes you feel best? And they're like, well, when I move, but then I have to get moving. And so like knowing that this program is available to help to manage, because I also recommend exercise to manage hot flashes, like improving that, muscle to adipose ratio, can be really helpful. So yeah, how do you see your program, or even just exercise in general, helping somebody, especially women who have gone into, medical menopause? That was like my long way of coming into that.
Yeah, I mean, it's for anyone who's gone through or has been going through. I mean, I January of last year was one of the wildest months I think ever experienced, because I had just had my reconstruction. I was tapering off of the medication, the pain medication that I was taking for the reconstruction, at the same time that I was tapering on to taking tamoxifen. And then I also, because I was taking Wellbutrin at the time, had to switch to a different antidepressant medication because there's interference of Wellbutrin with tamoxifen. It's well known. So I was also tapering off of Wellbutrin and onto Effexor, which is one of the medications actually can help with hot flashes. So I was fine with doing that, but I felt like an insane person for basically the whole month, because I was just like, there's this famous Salvador Dali quote where he says, I don't do drugs, I am drugs. And I was like, I kind of felt like I don't do drugs. I am drugs. Like I can't even tell you. People are like, how are you doing? I'm like, I have no idea, because everything was kind of turning on and off, and it was very wild. But the effect of going through medical menopause, and I have my friends are about my age. I'm 48, and some of them are starting, regular, not medical menopause. Some of them are maybe years away from it, all that kind of thing. And they're like, ooh, hot flashes. I'm like, yeah, no, you have no idea, because it's not, we're taking what can be a 5-year, under natural course of action experience of menopause. I mean, not, it could be any number of years, but a longer period. And we're just jamming it into like 1 year, basically. Like for me, the severity of it, this first year has been really intense on every kind of level. And so absolutely exercise to help with, all of the things, like if you're having joint pain, it's sort of the same as with arthritis. So, people are like, oh, I have arthritis. There's stuff going on in my joints, but I feel better when I move. But it is, again, that thing of like getting moving to begin with,
Right.
that feels hard, because you're like, well, things hurt. I don't want to move. But the other consideration specifically for women who are being forced through this sort of very rapid menopause, and for some women, it's, for me, I'm basically around the age that it hadn't started, but it probably would have in the next 5 years, at least for me. But there's plenty of women who are forced through this experience much younger, in their early 30s or late 20s, or when they were nowhere near, going through menopause. And so what I would say is that for that, to feel better in your body, yes, absolutely exercise. But I also now have concerns around osteopenia and osteoporosis because of this rapid removal of estrogen from my body in this medical menopause experience. And, I adore my oncologist, but he, he was like, make sure you're getting your vitamin D. I was like, okay. I mean, yes, of course. But in the in the research, there's an amazing trial called the Liftmore study, where they take women, and these are women who are postmenopausal naturally, but they have osteopenia, osteoporosis, and they start these women on weightlifting, like heavy weightlifting and impact training. And these are 60, 70-year-old women picking up barbells. It's so inspirational, and they have been able to slow or reverse their bone density loss. And so after everything that I have gone through in my body, I was like, I'll be damned if I'm going to come out of this with osteopenia or I'm like, after everything, that is not going to happen. And so strength training, lifting weight, resistance training, you do have to get to a higher level of load, but starting that, during that sort of survivorship time, if you're on one of these medications that is forcing you through this medical menopause, is invaluable, because why not start it before anything happens, right? Why not start to get stronger, start to build up and bank some of that bone density prior to any potential bone density loss, right? So that's also become a really high priority for me now in this period. And I lift heavy. And again, I'm a professional. I worked up to this. This wasn't what I was doing, month 2 after chemo or anything like that. I mean, I remember just doing things with just my body weight and being like, oh, I feel like a noodle, But but that was like heavy training for me at that point, right? For me at that point, my own body weight was really heavy.
Mm-hmm.
But then as you get stronger, the relative, heaviness of things changes, right? And so you can start to incorporate resistance bands, and you can start to incorporate external weight, and you improve and progress in your strength that way. And that's how you bank some of that, because that's how the bones work. Like they respond to stress, right? They respond to load. And so you got to really load them, and to really bank good, dense, heavy bones, which is what we want. I joke about, like, let's have a dense bones summer as opposed to like a hot girl summer. The new hot girl summer is a dense bone summer.
Well, I love that you brought up, because one thing that I was really promoting to my patients was doing yoga to help build bone. And you brought up how the study, which, he admits that it's not a great study, but then he still has these exercises. And I do,
know.
after seeing your posts, I've pulled back on that a little bit, but I do still promote his exercise video on YouTube because it does have movement for different levels. It's got the chair and it's got the supported, so I do tell people this is just a basic way for you to get moving, but skip over the first part.
Who are we talking about? Who's the he?
Oh, Lauren Fishman, Dr. Lauren Fishman. He's an MD who is a yoga teacher, certified yoga teacher, and he did two studies, I think, on.
He did the same study and then repeated it basically a few times. Yeah.
Oh, but didn't he come up with? I thought he added some other exercises too.
Possibly. I'm
Yeah.
not. Yeah.
So it's but yeah, it wasn't a well done study, but it was kind of hopeful in that, like, oh yay, I could just do yoga and build my bone density.
Oh, yoga builds bones? Was that the conclusion?
He claimed it reversed osteoporosis.
Yeah.
And then it turned out the study itself was very poorly done and did not have a lot of participants. A lot of people dropped out. It was like people self-selected themselves into the study.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a lot of problems with it, and it didn't prove what it claimed it proved. But a lot of people saw the title and they were like, oh, yoga improves bone density, and they got real excited about it. And so there's been a lot of damage control that those of us in the movement industry who know about it have to now go in and be like, well, actually, not really.
I was really like one of those people that it was just very, exciting that it could be something like yoga that you could just do at home and hold these, 12 poses for 30 seconds each, to build bone density. So yeah, thank you for slapping me upside the head.
Well, we did an entire episode. We did several episodes on hot flashes. So for our listeners, I want to go back to the beginning. That's actually where we started. That's our first 3 episodes. And then on bone health as well. And I go into great detail, and we both talk about the value of resistance exercise in building bone. What I hear you saying, Sarah, is because the simplest way I put it to people is, when you build muscle, you must build bone underneath, or else obviously your bicep, like imagine a giant bicep on a skinny little bone underneath, right? Like you can't do that. The bone would snap. So of course the bone has to answer the muscle building. What I hear you saying is it's not just tonifying your muscles. You have to build muscle. You have to do weight training and actually build muscle, not just tonify what's existing, to build bone. Is that correct?
Yeah. And so sort of going back to what we were talking about earlier, as far as how do people figure out like to start with weight training. And we were talking about that, it's about 7 out of 10 rate of perceived exertion. That is a very good starting point. And will definitely, a lot of the research does show that even at that level, you are still building bone, to your point. And that is kind of more in the sort of toning range that we're discussing. But at a certain point, the effect on the bone from that level, you're kind of graduate out of it as you get stronger, and you're going to have to start lifting things that are significantly heavier. I'm doing a program that was created by some like big time science strength nerds. And I'm like, thank you for making this so I didn't have to stretch my brain and figure it out. And it's very prescriptive, and I do it 3 times a week, and it actually goes up and down in terms of intensity. But every 3 or 4 weeks, I trial what is the heaviest thing that I can lift once. And it continues to go up. And not to brag or anything, but I can now do a 120-pound deadlift, which feels really great. But that happened, I've been doing this for the past 5 months or so. It didn't happen overnight, right? So it is a very gradual process. And this part of it, you definitely want to do with guidance. You don't want to just do it on your own. But where you start to have to work, and for women in particular, this is a concept that, again, I feel very passionately about, and I'm trying to kind of reverse the ideas around, is that you have to lift heavy. And what heavy is not that 7 out of 10. Heavy is something that you could maybe lift 5 times, which is a lot less than 10 times for those of us that understand math. And something that you're lifting 5 times, you're now at a 9 out of 10 exertion level. And that's where you start to then really impact that bone density. And, for various reasons that are probably outside the scope of this podcast, and also we would sit and be talking for, 17 hours about it. There are a lot of reasons why women have been scared off of lifting heavy. One is this idea that you might injure yourself, which the irony is, if you don't build strong bones, you're actually much more likely to injure yourself in a way that's really, really a much bigger problem than you kind of pulled a shoulder muscle and got a bit achy from it, right? And the other is this idea of like women's bodies are supposed to be kind of petite and small and dainty, and you're not supposed to have muscles, and that bulky is ugly, or is that you can't even get that bulky anyway. Let's be honest. If you're not training to be a Olympic weightlifter and you're just a regular person eating enough food and lifting heavy weights, you might look a little stronger, bigger, whatever, but you're not hulking out. It's just not happening. My body has not essentially changed shape from when I started this program to now. And I'm lifting easily 50 more pounds, so that idea in itself is just a fallacy. And so I'm really encouraging women, especially as we get older, especially as we have these concerns around bone density, to really investigate. And again, with the guidance of a professional at the right time, right? I wasn't lifting heavy when I was going through chemo. Like that's not appropriate. And I wouldn't even have tried. But at this point, over a year and a half out, absolutely it's appropriate. And it's what I'm focusing on.
Mm-hmm. Is there some links we can put in our show notes to help people find that kind of stuff? I mean, we're going to link to you, of course.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Say where, where people can find you.
Yeah. So the Cancer Resiliency Program is on my website. My website is Sarah Court DPT, which stands for doctorofphysicaltherapy.com. And then you'll find a tab and you scroll down and it says Cancer Resiliency Program. And that's where you can see all the videos. That kind of heavier lifting, there are a variety of resources out there. Stronger by Science is really good. They're a podcast, but they also have a ton of information online. And that's actually where I got my lifting program from. But again, I would recommend the best thing somebody could do if they're interested in doing that is start to work with a personal trainer. Mm-hmm. And it's not that, I know that's not always the cheapest option. You don't have to do it, every week until the end of time, but just let them teach you proper lift form, because as you're lifting heavier things, your form becomes way more important, and different techniques. And, they could write out a little program for you and then you could go do that and then come back in a month and they'll, adjust it as appropriate, things like that. But yeah, I would really recommend finding someone to work with you either in person or over Zoom. In person is really optimal so that they can really be looking at your form. Sure. But yeah, finding a local resource is really important for that.
I really want to talk about motorcycles, but I know it's good. We're already well, because I saw the post where you're like showed the difference between like a year, like March of 2022, yeah. And I mean, I was like, I'm still at March 2022. I mean,
yeah, so my Instagram is the only social media that I'm on because I don't have the bandwidth and TikTok. I still find it's for the babies. I'm like, you know what? I don't have a problem being like, I'm too old for this. So Sarah Court DPT on Instagram is where you can find me. And I mostly post about movement and exercise and strength. And I give examples of things people can try and all that kind of stuff. And then every now and then I force people to indulge me in the fact that I'm obsessed with motorcycles. And so I did a post recently about, I started riding about less than a year ago. I'm coming up on about a year. And so I have some videos of like the very first few times I ever tried to get on a motorcycle. And then like a couple months later when I was like, oh, I could go 30 miles an hour. This feels crazy. And then I just last weekend went to something called Superbike School where you have 2 days on a racetrack. And I was like, how it's like if you ever get to fly first class, coach is ruined for the rest of your life, So I went to Superbike School and I was like, how could I ever ride a motorcycle on the street again after that? But it's very fun because it's way safer. Actually, people are like, isn't that dangerous? But there's no cars, there's nothing else on the track except for you and 15 other motorcycles. So it's actually very, very safe. The intense part is you're on the kind of bike that like MotoGP professional riders are on. So you're on a very powerful, very fast motorcycle. And that's a little intimidating, but the course itself, you're just doing drills. So they're like, okay, in this period of time, you're working on this skill. And then next time you're working on this skill. And but it's so much fun. There's something magical. My experience is that there's this, people are like, oh, you must be like an adrenaline junkie. And I'm like, nothing could be farther from the truth. Adrenaline is one of the scariest feelings that I do not enjoy it. But for me, and I don't know if this is the same for you, when you get the bike and you put it in exactly the right position, and you're in a position on the bike where you feel comfortable and you're able to relax, which is a really big part of successfully riding the motorcycle, is being physically relaxed yourself. And you're just coming through a corner, and it's not too fast and it's not too slow, and you don't have to adjust the angle, and you've kind of hit everything just right, and you're just sailing around that corner. It is one of the best feelings to me. And it also, because there's no room really for thinking about anything else when you're going 80 miles an hour or any miles an hour, really. It actually, for me, it is a very mentally quieting experience, because it forces you to be completely present with what is happening. You are not sitting there being like, well, I wonder what I'm going to make for dinner. Like you can't be, because you have to be paying attention to everything that's going on, So for me, it's got more of that kind of Zen feeling than that kind of like Tom Cruise Top Gun, like, woohoo, But I'm completely obsessed. I made the mistake of sitting on a former boyfriend's motorbike, and then he put me on that, when you lean off the bike, and I was like, oh no, now I want to do this, but moving fast. And that was it for me. So it's, I love it.
Well, and it's a good lesson in, like, if something draws you, do it.
Sure.
Right? You got on the motorcycle, you had a little experience, like, oh, I like this.
Yeah.
And just to pursue that, and not just kind of have it be a fleeting thought where you're like, yeah, I always wanted to ride a motorcycle. Right? I mean, there's a difference there. You took action, which takes conviction and determination. And so kudos to you. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do sometimes. It's a lot easier not to do things that we want to do. So
absolutely.
And it's an extension of like your body. And so what you were going back to saying about like, taking some control as you're going through treatment and having that control over your body. I mean, that's like kind of the ultimate, you have to become one with the motorcycle. My husband's probably listening to this laughing at me. He's like so into motorcycles, and he's not going to believe I'm talking about this. But this is how being able to, like when I was going through treatment, he took me riding dirt out in the desert in Arizona. And I had been like sulky and like so not happy and like, bald as a baby and going through treatment. And then riding in the desert, I felt so elated that I had, and I fell a couple times, but I was like laughing and obviously didn't hurt myself that bad. But, it's just taking a little bit of control back is how I felt it was as I, when I rode that time during treatment. And so, I can see it all kind of ties together.
Yeah. I don't know that I would have been as interested in this prior to going through cancer and cancer treatment. There was definitely something about it where, to your point, it's about this feeling of like, oh yeah, because there is so much, when you start to really work on refining it, there's so much skill and nuance involved. And it's so energizing in that way. When my former boyfriend taught me how to ride, and he says, I will never forget the sound of the first time you actually took your feet off the ground. You weren't just walking the bike along, but you actually got up and you were going maybe 10 miles an hour. And he's like, as you went past, I heard you going, ha, 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 ha. Like I was just laughing my butt off because I was so excited.
I have all these pictures that my husband's taken of me with this like stupid grin on my face underneath my helmet, just like smiling like so big. But yeah. Well, cool.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. And
it's been a pleasure.
You're our physical therapist, yoga teacher, bike riding, breast cancer surviving, badass guest. So this was really fun, and I hope folks got some information that's useful to them out of it, and maybe some inspiration. I hope.
And you'll have a lot more people signing up for the cancer resiliency program, myself included.
Yeah, go check it out. Check it out. Donate if you can. Do what you can. Take care of yourselves. That's what we're here for, to help people find ways of doing that and living their best lives.
Fantastic. Thank you guys so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, that was super fun. I learned a few things.
Oh, I did too. And I sincerely, as soon as we hang up, I am signing up for the program because I need some guidance. I need a little guidance. I need a little bit more motivation.
I think it's a good idea. I might just do it for the heck of it too.
Oh, well,
just because who doesn't need movement in yoga?
I think that we both should do it, and then we'll check in on each other. We'll be accountable.
Ooh, accountability.
One thing that we didn't mention, that Sarah didn't mention, is she does have a podcast that is more geared for movement professionals, yoga, Pilates, physical therapists. It's called Movement Logic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure it's available wherever podcasts are streamed. And so we'll put a link to that also in our show notes.
I suppose wherever you're listening to us now, they probably have it.
There you go. Wherever podcasts roam. That's my favorite way of saying it. And then Tina, you wrote an article recently.
I did. I wrote an article for the Natural Medicine Journal on anthocyanins, which is a fancy term for basically the red to blue pigments in nature. And how adding them to a meal, and in the study that I commented on, the study was done on people who were college students, healthy college students, who ate, ready for this, want to know what they used for a bad, quote unquote, bad food meal. It was basically an Egg McMuffin. It was it was an English muffin with egg and cheese and sausage. And then they added a little bit of palm oil just to top it off and make it a hugely high fat, saturated fat meal. And long story short, you can go check out the article for all the details. But if you add some anthocyanins along with it, which is usually berries, that's the highest content that we can get our hands on for an economical price, it blunted some of the bad effects of all that fat and simple carbohydrates that people ate in that one meal. So it was kind of an interesting study because I liked it because it's like, I'm a naturopath and I eat really well 90+% of the time, but sometimes all bets are off and you eat what's put in front of you. And, maybe if you're invited to bring something to that dinner, you bring some, some kind of berry pie or cobbler or something. Blunt the effect.
It just cancels each other, which you're basically saying is if you have berry cobbler, it cancels out any bad effects.
Right?
It's like how people think that chewing celery cancels out the calories, which it does not. There is no calorie deficit or negative calorie, whatever. But yes, so the berries, eat your berries, people.
Yeah, it may not cancel the effect, but it might blunt it a little bit so your glucose doesn't go as high and don't make your cholesterol jump as high, that kind of thing. Anyway, that's what I've done recently. It just came out in Natural Medicine Journal in March.
All right, we'll link.
Which I should say is a free online open access journal that I'm the editor of. So I'm the editor-in-chief at the Natural Medicine Journal, and I don't write very often, but this is one of the few times I put a piece in. So There's my plug.
I was going to say, nice plug. And I have nothing to plug, other than I can get out of my apartment in just a couple minutes if there is a tornado, as I learned earlier today. So
that's what those drills are about.
That's why there's a drill. So on that note, I'm Dr. Leah Sherman.
And I'm Dr. Tina Kaiser.
And this is the Cancer Pod.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Cancer Pod. Remember to subscribe, review, and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media for updates. And as always, this is not medical advice. These are our opinions. Talk to your doctor before changing anything related to your treatment plan. The Cancer Pod is hosted by me, Dr. Leah Sherman, and by Dr. Tina Kaiser. Music is by Kevin MacLeod. See you next time.